We've all heard of smart cities because I think apart from the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan and the National Digital Literacy Mission, Digital India and smart cities have been in the press for a lot of reasons recently. And for good reasons, I think, because all of us are aware that the urbanization phenomenon is not going to go away. And if we must urbanize, I think it is good to look at multiple cities coming up which are truly smart. And I won't demystify smart because that is what your panel is going to do for you. I was in Barcelona for the first 3 days of this week and just discussing with some of the city planners on the kind of work they're doing in Barcelona. So I'm saying it's not just in New York or London or Singapore or any other place, but a place like Barcelona is absolutely amazing in terms of the kind of progress they've made in making that city smart. And somebody mentioned some numbers which I will throw at you. They said that thanks to the smart city concept of Barcelona, close to 47 to 50,000 jobs are being created, primarily because of it's not because of automation, but because of so much of employment being created. Second is almost $1 billion of value is being realized every year because things move that much more efficiently. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about what is the concept of the smart city. Just to kind of set the agenda on the table. We will talk about what technologies, what are the various multinational companies doing to make smart cities a reality globally so that we can take best practices or exemplars from there and see how that works in our country. We will also talk about what are the parameters of building and construction that needs to make smart cities fully active in this country. And finally, we will talk about the larger issues of smart cities is not just about digital India. Smart cities is all about making a new way of interacting between citizens and government happen, and we'll discuss all. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to request each of the panelists to maybe talk, present for about anywhere between 5 to 7 minutes. That'll take about 35-40 minutes. And then we'll throw it open to any questions, any suggestions, or anything that you want to clarify. So I'm going to start right away with Krishna Kumar. Krishna Kumar is not only works for Symphony, but he also is a columnist in Financial Express. And he has some ideas on smart cities, which we will start with. Then we will move to technology presentations, a construction viewpoint, and also the larger viewpoint on how smart cities really happen. Krishna. Thank you very much, Mr. Ganesh. So, Karthik, can we have it? Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, so I'm not a smart city expert, and I don't believe there are any smart city experts right now in the world, because everybody is trying to come up with new concepts and ideas and all that. Right? So I have given my perspective. It has some amount of technology, some amount of non-technology aspects, and we have a august panel here who are more familiar in terms of technology. So I would assume that they would give far more insights in terms of what they've done in their respective organizations. Okay, let's start. I need to start. Sorry. So, okay, that's good. Okay, so how many of you are from Bangalore here? Oh, wonderful. That's good to know. Because some of the examples I want to give, I'm sure should resonate well with you. So before smartness, I think we need to have common sense cities. Okay, or basically, cities where you have, sensible things going on. Okay, what do I mean by common sense city? What is the sensibility that I'm talking about? Outer Ring Road. I think all of you know about Outer Ring Road, right? There is this large technology park where I would assume 35 to 40,000 people are working. Okay, and the road is really wide, and we have roughly I would say thousands of people crossing the road every day. Neither the companies that are located in that place, nor the builder, nor the government has made any effort to create a skywalk, right? So, why do we let our people lose their lives? These are all simple things, right? You don't need high-end data processing, you don't need analytics and all that, right? So this is one example. Okay, I'm sure all of you have heard about Kumbh Mela, right? Kumbh Mela, right? So I have an example of a Bangalore-based Kumbh Mela, which is KR Puram. Okay, it's a vehicle Kumbh Mela.
every day you can, I mean, I go through that route every day. So there are, at least 100 vehicles crisscrossing, and I don't know, what's the problem there? Why can't we get some these basic things, done, right? So the third example that I have is, lot of, I mean, there is a, proper broad gauge line established between West and East Bangalore, okay, from Kengeri all the way up to Whitefield. There are two lines already existing. Why can't we have a Silicon City local train, right? I mean, the metro, I don't know when it is going to be up, okay, maybe 10 years, 20 years, I don't know even if I'll see it in my lifetime. Okay, right now it's all joy rides with, metro today in Bangalore, right? So these are things, without using too much of technology, we should be able to do. Am I making sense, gentlemen? Okay, good. Okay, now next let's talk about, smartness and, what we need to do and things like that. Sorry, wrong. Sorry. So for me, the gist of smart city is GIST, where government, industry, society, and technology, all of them come together basically to make our life simple. And that's the end of it, right? So that's the main purpose of the smart city. I want to highlight two things here. One is participative governance. Okay, I mean, all of you know about what participative governance means. And more importantly, people's attitude. It's our attitude, right? We don't care for our cities. We don't take care of our public assets. These things are fundamental, right? These are all DNA issues, according to me. We have to fix those things before we can talk about lovely things like data analytics and things like that. Okay, so and whatever we do in any smart city or any city should primarily be. Okay. Oh yeah, sure. So sorry. So whatever we do is towards a common man. It should be always common man oriented, right? So and it's a continuous process. Smart city creation or any city creation improvement is a continuous process, right? So with this as a initial slide, let me go on to the. What happened? Okay, good. So I want to give you this context of the ICT. What has the country has actually transformed using ICT, right? So not long ago, maybe 20 years back, we had this OIT scheme for getting a phone at home. I don't know. I hope some of you would recognize and relate to that, right? So today, getting a phone connection is so simple. Okay, I remember my father used to wait for 7 years to get a phone connection. Now it's like the jiffy you can get everything, right? So today, in terms of teledensity, India has over 75% teledensity, right? The number of people per 100 people having a phone or phone connection. Cities, it's over 100%. So everybody has a mobile phone today, right? And in terms of internet usage, 260 million people are using internet today, right? And then in terms of 3G and mobile-oriented broadband usage, over 60 million people are using it. Okay, no wonder the Airtel and other stock prices are going up, right? So that's the sort of the ICT infrastructure that's already in place. Okay, e-governance, for example. Today I can pay my utility bills, I can pay my tax using internet. So we have something already in place. There is technology adoption has been pretty positive in the country, and ICT framework is already there. So is it great so that anything about smart city can be envisaged and created on it? Certainly not. There are some things to be done, but still we have some platform compared to what we had 10 years, 15 years back, right? Okay, so that's the sort of platform on which we are sitting. Okay, now I want to talk about some of the ideas or thoughts on what type of smartness can be added as such. Okay, not all of them are technology. So I mean I've already mentioned that in the beginning. We should focus on brownfield cities. Brownfield cities are cities which are already there, and greenfield are cities which are going to come up, completely new, grounds up and things like that. Okay, so I would like, to specially mention about these three places. Okay, Kochi, Guwahati, and Goa, Panaji. Why? In terms of voter turnout, they have been the best. They have over 75% in the last few elections. Okay, that means something, right? That means that people participation is, people's engagement level with the city or the government is pretty good. Okay, unlike Bangalore, where I am from, it's 45%, maximum 50%. We celebrate if it is more than 50%, right? So I would strongly encourage the government whenever they are doing this fund allocation to consider this aspect of people engagement as a key aspect, or give some weightage to that, so that these cities also can develop and become real smart cities. Each city will have priorities. I don't want to expand on that. Let's look at the important point. Okay, see, rationalizing existing systems is an absolutely important thing before we can get on to the smart city journey. Okay, so why do we have? I mean, I'm sure you would have seen in a bus stop. I mean, I take a bus every week to the office. Okay, just to be a good citizen. So in the bus stop, every time you see the 50 people standing, all of them looking towards one side, waiting for the bus. Right? All of you have seen that, right? And the one bus goes, then again we'll wait for the next bus. Why don't we have a simple, bus arrival information? There are already, GPSs installed on a lot of these, buses. Why can't we have, these things done? Simple things, right? That's one thing. Then, in terms of, ticketing, can we use some, simple technology to get, ticketing done? And also in terms of parking, a lot of people, I'm sure all of us here would have a problem going to the central business district in Bangalore over a weekend, right? The reason for that is parking is not there. Very difficult to find parking. There are lots of government offices and private offices where the parking is empty. Why can't we use that? Why can't we, allow, get into some, have a correct checks and balance in place so that, those can be utilized effectively so that the public can be, it'll help the general public, right? So these are some ideas in terms of, rationalizing. I'm sure you would have many more such ideas, in your mind as well. In terms of e-governance, like I mentioned, we already have something in place, but we need to have some more impetus on things like land registration and all. Okay, because land registration, I went through that myself. It took about 4 or 5 months to get it done. Okay, and I don't know where it is stuck. And I said I'm not going to pay any bribe, and then it dragged and dragged and dragged. Okay, finally I got it done. What I am expecting is that we should have a simple system where there is some amount of, this data there should be some sort of a workflow automation where you can find out where it is stuck and how many days it will take for me to get it done, right? Am I making sense so far? Gentlemen, ladies? Okay, wonderful. Let's move on then. I have 1 more minute, I know. Let me complete it quickly, okay? So, in terms of policy framework, like we have the Make in India campaign, we also need a Make it happen campaign from the government, right? We need to, they should have that attitude to get things done, okay? And the idea should come bottom up, and planning can happen, top down, right? And then we should have measurable targets, and then we should have, we should fix accountability and things like that. All of them, in the right policy, we actually will set the, the guidance for this whole, smart city initiative as such. Next, in terms of innovation and ecosystem, so Make in India campaign is definitely going to help in terms of innovation, innovative ideas coming through and things like that. We can have a very good product ecosystem which we sadly lack today in the IT ecosystem as such. And thirdly, we also have some of these small companies coming up with some product ideas and all that. So that also will certainly help in this whole journey. What's most important to me is we need to leverage on this demographic dividend. 50% of the people in the country are less than 29 years right now. Okay, so can we really make use of that? Can we make an impact using them? Can we do some good skill enhancement? Can we add some engineering courses related to urban planning and things like that? That's one idea from my side. The last and the most important point I want to make is that this should be an open architecture. I don't want one company to be responsible for everything and they do everything. We should allow smaller Indian companies to participate in this whole creation of this technology and integration process, right? And then in terms of IT industry, are we geared up? Of course, yes. We have excellent skills in terms of IoT, mobile and connected devices. In terms of analytics, cloud, everything we have capability. We have a mature and highly skilled workforce here. All we need is the right direction, and then we are definitely set. I will maybe take 1 more minute. Sorry. So I don't have time. So I will skip this one in terms of challenges and opportunities, and then. Finally, I want to key takeaway from my side is rationalize existing systems, okay, get the right policy framework in place, and finally, IT industry will have a significant role in terms of smart city creation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gogia. And listening to him, you can make out that he's a young man growing up in Bangalore. Because I grew up in the finer state of Bihar, and there it didn't take 7 years to get a telephone. It took 10 years to get a telephone, and 10 years after that to get a dial tone. We're coming from slightly different parts of this smart planet. So let me now he made a big pitch for inclusion and small companies to be involved in smart cities. But I think we should give the two elephants in the room, which is IBM and Cisco, to tell us what their companies and specifically what are their views on smart cities. So we'll start with Prashant. Prashant, of course, is part of the Smarter Planet group of IBM, and I think he's as good an expert as any to tell us about smart cities.
Hi. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Natarajan.
So ladies and gentlemen, I'll try to give you the perspective a little bit top down, right, on smarter cities. So for those of you who are familiar with all the buzz and this whole initiative, right, you would recognize that the kind of cities that are covered under this initiative is very diverse, very broad, right. So on the one hand, you have the Delhi Mumbai industrial corridor type of greenfield cities, which are we have the luxury of starting from the grounds up, right, and building an ideal smart city. Then you have 100 satellite towns, which are kind of earmarked for development to get them up to the level of tier 1 cities, right? For example, Delhi, Bombay, Bangalore. And then there is a set of heritage cities like Varanasi, Allahabad, Kanpur, and so on, right? And then of course on the private sector side, right, we also can look at some of the large private townships, such as the work we've done with Shaishav here on Lodha, where cities like Palava, right, they are coming up as microcosms of smart cities, right? So that's the spectrum that we have when we talk about smart cities. So what do you think is the common element, right? One could think that this is so diverse, right, a set, that there can be no commonality. But actually there is, right? And that's the sort of main theme of what I'm going to talk about. So the citizen outcomes are really at the heart of smart cities, right? No matter whether you are in Varanasi or whether you are living in Lodha or whether you are, in Bangalore, right, struggling with day-to-day congestion in traffic, the fundamental starting point is citizen outcomes, right? And the technology solutions flow from there, right? That's how the journey starts. It's not the other way around. You do not think about technology first and then map it, right, to how it's going to lead to outcomes. So, our point of view is that smarter cities, technology-related solutions are fundamentally, they have to be holistic solutions going across 3 pillars. And these are people, process, and infrastructure, right? So to give you an example of each one of them, right, I'll just pick some interesting examples based on our experience, having done close to about 2,000 projects worldwide in smarter cities. So in my keynote 2 days ago here, I gave one of the examples on the people side, right? So this was in the city of Sao Paulo in Brazil, right? What we tried there is that, we use citizen engagement as a means to create a smart city. So what we did is we gave the citizens an app which makes it very easy for them to report on civic issues. For example, geocode their location, take a picture, put a bunch of comments that, are they reporting a broken street light, a pothole, or what have you. So, the technology part is not important. What's important is what outcome it led to. Within 3 hours, 3 hours of launching this app, right, for the citizens in Sao Paulo, 4 square kilometer area of the city was completely mapped. Every single pothole, every broken pavement, think of what it could do, for example, for crime prevention, right? You can really apply it to Indian context and think about that when you unleash, right, these tens of thousands of, you can call them human sensors, right, vigilant citizens out on the street and use technology as a means of engagement, right, you see what kind of power can be unleashed. Now the city, or in all cities, whether in India or outside, they struggle with the issue of, sustaining, right, financially. They have limited capital, they have limited amount of people. Think about how quickly the city can now prioritize in terms of where exactly it needs to, kind of focus its resources, its maintenance crews, and so on. To take another example, again from a citizen side, Ms. Kumar earlier spoke about congestion in Bangalore, right? So once again, right, the solution is we can't just keep building capacity, right? You can't, keep building new roads. You can't force people to move outside of the city, even though there are satellite towns, right? And just monitoring traffic and doing, let's say, large traffic management centers is not going to alleviate congestion. It just allows you to monitor. So some work that we did in Nairobi, in Africa, we again tried to use citizens to really address this issue. What we did is we created a simulation for, traffic flow in the city. And we were able to guide citizens using the traffic data, right, and the public transit data, that how they can plan their journey hours, right, optimally, and which modes of transport they can use, right, to really alleviate congestion. We gave some suggestions to the government in terms of how they can stagger paydays, right, for the citizens. And without I would say, a penny spent in capex, just using information that was already available with the city, we were able to alleviate traffic congestion in Nairobi. So, these are the kind of examples of when you bring citizens into the equation, right, and use information in very smart ways, right, what you can do. To take an example on the process side, right, in one of our flagship references is this city of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, right? So before they were getting ready to host the FIFA World Cup and now the Olympics, right, in 2016, they engaged IBM really to say that, how can we coordinate work across agencies, right, in this city, right? And this is a process intervention, if you think about it, right? So when, let's say, crowds happen or some emergency happens, how do different agencies in the city come together, right, to really resolve the issue? And you can think of it as, in India, for example, many urban local bodies, somebody digs up the road, another one comes and patches it. So it's really just about process and, information sharing. So in Rio, we were able to achieve this kind of integration across 30 different agencies. 30 different agencies, right, in a single, command and control center. And that became a flagship smart city project. And lastly, to take an example from infrastructure, that is probably the more common narrative, right? So all of you, when you read the popular press, chances are that most of the time you hear about the infrastructure side of the story, that let's do a lot of automation, let's do sensors, let's do SCADA, and things of that nature. And of course, that has its own value. So for example, the work we are doing in water management with Bangalore Water Board and with the Kerala Water Authority now, these are all about using data to figure out what are the positions of leaks, right, in the water network, and how you can bring down the amount of unaccounted water. Many cities have close to 40% unaccounted water in India. And really using data coming from automation, sensors, etc., to figure out where to fix that infrastructure. So it's a holistic picture. Each city, based on its local context, local priorities, will be suitable for different kinds of technology solutions, right? So I was explaining about Varanasi to somebody yesterday, right? The whole issue in the city is regarding solid waste management. And I was explaining to them, and we don't have time here to talk about that, but Varanasi, 80% of the city is unsevered, right? So the issue is not that you put more sewage treatment plants. The issue is how you get the sewage there. And it's a 100-year-old infrastructure. There is no way that you're going to just revamp and do underground sewage in the whole city. That becomes, from a technology perspective, a decision support problem. You have to do algorithms used on the spatial data, the GIS data, as to where the sewer lines are, where the open drains are, and what is the least cost way of getting the sewage to the sewage treatment plants. So it's an algorithmic problem. It has nothing to do with infrastructure. So I hope you appreciate the point. The 100 smart cities is a vision which has very diverse, very complex problems for India. The onus is really on us to keep the narrative focused on the outcome, right? And bring to bear those technology solutions which are relevant for the Indian context, right? And hopefully by the diversity of examples I've told you across the world, that's how, right? That's how we are trying to apply those insights to India in a very relevant way, right? So that's my thanks.
Thanks, Prashant. I think that really brings it down to the level of all of us, because otherwise smart city will remain at a very ethereal level. In fact, there is a very young company right here in Bangalore, a company called NextDrop, which was set up by two graduates from the University of Berkeley in California, both Indians, who came back, set up this entity in Hubli, and actually were predicting the availability of water so that you have predictability of information available. In fact, right now we are working with them with the Bangalore Water Supply Board to see how we can actually predict the levels of availability. So a lot of simple solutions which will eventually enable the smart city. Prashant mentioned the Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor. I mean, the opportunity in that for entrepreneurs is huge. Because one of the projects that they're looking at in the state of Madhya Pradesh, for instance, is to have a complete cloud-enabled platform which connects up close to 10,000 SMEs who will all be small and medium manufacturers using cloud supply chain solutions to enable everybody to have access to the same information. So this is at a state level, but I'm saying whether it is at a city level, small city level, or at a state level, this is what will make smart cities really happen. So let's get a Cisco perspective from Anshik.
Thank you. So I'm very glad that you said that the concept of smart city is very ethereal. So when the government announced smart cities, we in Cisco had mixed emotions because we actually did a small poll as to what people mean by a smart city. And everybody tended to define smart city in their context of their personal spaces. So if you were to just trawl the newspapers today, a smart city is this green, salubrious space, cascading waterfalls, children biking around, everybody selling you the concept of a gated community. So long as you had that in your homes, the city was smart. So we have to, there's some sense of reality here. That ain't happening in India. Cities in India will not have the romantic American notions of being wide, really green spaces, and hopefully that leads to betterment of our lives. Cities in India have to be compact. Now, let me just dwell, Prashant's made some of the points very lucidly. We are partners and, we do a lot of work together. So I'm not going to repeat the points that Prashant's made, but possibly complement some of the points that he's made. And we use this anecdotal evidence in almost every speech that we do on smart cities now. I don't know if you realize, it's a question which I'll end up answering anyway, is do you realize how many, India has 1.3 billion people and globally there are about 8 billion people. Now please tell me how many people use toothbrushes. I typically don't get a good answer, but the number of people who use toothbrushes are between 2.5 and 3 billion people globally. But that's not the story. The story is how many people use cell phones. And today there are 7 billion cell phones on the planet. An average Indian today is first getting access to the network. He's getting access to broadband before he's getting access to potable drinking water, before he gets access to basic sanitation and healthcare. Staggering. And hence the notion of smart cities being this technological whiz coming and doing something fancy on technology, it's good in fantasy, it's good as part of script writing, but alas, it's not generally true in the context of how we're going to apply solutions. In that context, we find that technology advancements have far outstripped where regulation is today. As we speak right now, there is a project that Cisco is launching on remote launching of FIRs. You will see it in the newspapers tomorrow. I'm not going to dwell at it at length, but you may want to peruse that at your ease to find out what can be done in terms of improving process and indeed lives of citizens to make the city smart. Let's focus on two other issues. We find that there are two primary issues outside of city management and processes that need a lot of attention. One of them is healthcare and the other is education. I don't know if you realize this, India as a country of 1.3 billion people, of which 400 million of us, and I think everybody in this room, will accrue to himself or herself fantastic quality of healthcare. But there are 800 million of us who will have poor to almost no healthcare coverage. We can't really have a country which has got high teledensity, everybody using cell phones, but not have access to poorer healthcare. The doctor-to-patient coverage ratio, as soon as you get out of the urban confines and get out of what we'd call the 53 1 million plus cities in India, drops down, it almost falls off a cliff. And therefore, the need to enhance this coverage using a raft of technology solutions becomes really important. Secondly, I draw your attention to a study that just came out yesterday. It was published by USR. It's in the space of education. I don't know if you realize this, an average 8th standard child in India cannot multiply a 3-digit number with a 3-digit number. So if it was 527 into 787, chances are that he is not likely to make a logical conclusion to that number. Principally because there is very poor coverage of education and there is very poor coverage of solutions that get provided. Technology, I think, can actually provide a fine basis in improving education coverage, whether done remotely, or indeed make it more equal and available consistently across all the bases. From Cisco's standpoint, therefore, we are focusing on these activities. One is healthcare, one is education. We're looking at energy management, people, process, technology. Those things are all things that have been alluded to earlier, and hence I'm trying to focus on those things that we haven't spoken of earlier. The other thing that we are seeing in a smart city, which is of importance today, is the need or the management of citizen services. Look at your own examples that if you wanted a passport today, and if you did not live in the city of Bangalore, let's say you lived in Gulbarga or Bida, I'm just using Karnataka as an example, let's say Haldwani or somewhere else in UP. What is the process of getting a passport? And if you cannot really find out, if you do not really have enough antecedents to prove who you are, unfortunately, my word is not good enough for me to be a citizen. An average time to get a passport and validate yourself to be a citizen of India today varies something between 9 days to 5 years. That is the availability of documents, endemic corruption, and what have you. These are hopefully some of the portents that technology can resolve with relative ease and without dramatic amounts of capex. The point that Prashant makes very compellingly on process then becomes important, and we can then possibly integrate these process points more succinctly into managing citizen services to a cogent whole so that the activity of living in a city becomes smart. There are two other points that I want to make in conclusion. The other thing that we're seeing in terms of economic activity as it pertains to urbanization is that whilst urbanization is compelling, indeed competition now is no longer between countries. When Zensar that Ganesh leads chooses to make an investment somewhere, it's very often not country specific, but it's city specific. When Zensar chose to go into Shanghai, the competition was not between India and China, but the competition was between Mumbai and Shanghai and Bangalore and Barcelona or whichever other city that we compare ourselves to. One of the primary drivers of competitiveness is ICT because it provides some degree of transparency and hopefully leads to better management. Should cities not choose to be competitive, we are losing a large trick in making our cities smart. Lastly, there are two other points that we want to make on legislation and on fiscal federalism. There is no municipality today, with the exception of the Pimpri Chinchwad municipality outside of Pune, which is profitable. 70% and upwards of 70% of Bangalore municipal allocations go into paying salaries. And then some goes to paying extended loans and debts, and we have less than 10% of available disposable cash to do something new. In the wake of poorer financial models and the lack of fiscal federalism, which is to say that there has got to be access to taxes revenue for each municipality to decide what it wants to do, we aren't likely to see dramatic changes. Therefore, there is some need or some attention that ought to be paid on overall legislation and management of our cities. Unlike many others, and this is not a critique of what we do, we find that the mayoral positions that many of the worshipful mayors have in India sometimes becomes a little redundant because they're dependent on various other agencies. And hence, the assertion that we are going out with is, outside of technology, there is real attention that needs to be paid on legislation and for us to manage legislation succinctly. I'm sure there are going to be more points that we've got to cover. I'll stop because I want to be within time. But should there be more questions, let's address that at the end. Thanks for listening to me.
Thanks, Anshik. I think that was a very comprehensive coverage so far on what is a smart city, what are the kind of technologies, and what is the imperatives from a citizen point of view. And I just want to re-emphasize two of the points that Anshik made right at the beginning, which is healthcare and education. And I think one of the wise things that this government has done, and there are quite a few of them, is to take two initiatives forward very, very aggressively. One is, of course, literacy. I mentioned early on, but I mean, today we are, when I say we as NASSCOM Foundation, we're working very closely with the Government of India's Ministry of IT. You heard Mr. Ajay Kumar, who's a Joint Secretary on the first day. They're very passionate about ensuring that there is a national digital literacy mission. It's actually called DISHA, which is the Digital Saksharta Abhiyan. And the basic premise there is that if there are 220 million families in this country, 22 crore families, at least one member of every family to be digitally literate. And the idea being that only if somebody is digitally literate, which means the ability to access information through a smart device, it need not be a computer, only then will that propagate. NASSCOM itself is working very closely with the Health Ministry on what is called NAT Health. So our belief is that if health propagates across and literacy and education, that will make the beginnings of, I think, a citizen activism towards, I think, what Krishna Kumar talked about, more voting, more advocacy in making these things happen. So I think that's something that we need to think about. So I'm going to now move to Shaishav Dharia. Shaishav looks at strategy for LODA, which is one of the developer groups well known in this country, and get his thoughts on smart cities.
Hi, thank you. I think this is kind of the right sequence because it kind of gives a chance for a developer to say, how does all of these concepts get pulled into what we are doing? So as a background, we are developing a city in the outskirts of Mumbai called Palava. Palava is about 4,500 acres, which is about 30% of the size of Mumbai today. So it started in 2010, so truly a greenfield city. We don't have the same challenges that maybe a brownfield city like a Mumbai would have. So much easier, but it also is important because it is kind of the way forward. There is a lot of challenges within the existing urban metros that cannot be solved very easily. So you are going to see a proliferation of satellite towns, new townships. And it's actually good because it's the only way to solve the urbanization problem. So what we hope to share is, one way to think about it. Could you start that, please? I gave it to someone by the name of Brian. All right, so while they load up the presentation, so what is, the first slide was really about talking about the challenges in India in urbanization, lack of infrastructure, all of that stuff, which everyone understands. So when we started designing Palava, the work actually started in 2008 in terms of really the planning. So I think the most important part, which was alluded before, what we've done historically in India is we focused on building a home or a workplace or a bus system. Instead, our focus now needs to start moving into basically, rather than just smarter city, it's a smarter way to plan a city. So when we develop Palava, everything is being built around this notion of 5, 10, and 15. Simple thing means whatever you need every day, like your bus stop, your daily convenience store, that'll be 5 minutes walking from your house. Whatever you need within the week is within 10 minutes. And the largest city institutions are within 15, 20 minutes. What that does is your first problem of transport gets killed because you're going to incentivize walking only. Second is about interconnecting, right? It's about how do we connect all the various systems within the city. Governance, which everyone's talked about, because ultimately, after reflection of 5 years, now that we are governing the city, we are also the municipality in Palava itself. Building the city was actually far easier than governing it. So governing is a very important aspect. And last, what both Prashant, what the previous speaker spoke about was engaging with the citizens. So it's about basically citizen participation, citizen way of how does everything you do make a difference to their life. So again, these are the 3 things that we think about what smart does for us. First is efficient governance and service delivery. How do we do that in a smarter way? Around the themes of governance, infrastructure, the digital part, and data technology enablement. Second is around the infrastructure we are building. We have to build an infrastructure that's going to live for life because we are also the operator. So our future of our city is based on the quality of our sustainable infrastructure. Today, everybody in the country talks about power and the need of a shortage of power. 10 years from now, the power problem will be negligible compared to the water problem that we are going to face as a country, right? So how do we basically build sustainable infrastructures around power, water, solid waste, transportation? And then third is around what we just heard last, improving the quality of life beyond the basics. This is through education, healthcare, safety, and security. So Palava today is about a 250-acre development. We have already sold 20,000 homes. We already have delivered 8,000 homes. And every year, we will be selling and delivering 6,000, 7,000 homes going forward. By 2025, we'll have covered 1,200 acres out of the 4,500-acre city, spent about 28,000 crores, 1 lakh homes, and about 3.5 lakh jobs, right? The interesting part about all of this is that this is completely privately funded by ourselves. except for the external infrastructure that connects Palava to the rest of Mumbai, everything in Palava is developed by Lodha. So we've been actually doing this for about 24 months, not realizing smart city was going to become such a big thing. It actually only became from our paranoia that we had to run the city for the rest of our life, so we better know what we are doing. So we've been working on this for 24 months, and 6 out of the 8 domains, I think at least the plumbing or the base of what you would build on is already in place today, already implemented. So let me tell you, for example, under governance, we have now next month a rollout of a Palava Smart Card. It's an access card, it's a cashless, it's a prepaid debit card. Basically, the city will not take any funds in the form of cash or credit card from any citizen. It'll only be through this card. That also does a great amount for basically security. A lot of theft is linked to cash transactions, right? It also becomes our way in the future to basically do e-healthcare, because the card will have access to your records, it will have access to your digitized information on medical, that will be circulated across the city. So it becomes a single piece of, it's like your passport within the city. Second, what interesting thing is like energy and utilities. So we don't really have a problem of theft of water, right? Because it's kind of our own land. So we first decided not to put smart meters in the water network system. And then we realized is that you never know when there is a leakage of water because of bad work done at some point. And that we realized just about a few months ago. So now we've gone and metered our entire water network so that we can, within a radius of about 30 to 40 meters, know if there's a leakage of water in any part of the network, go close it. And why is this important? Because even at our early stage today, our own water bill every month is about 1.5 crores. That's not sustainable. About 50 lakhs of that is actually wastage. So this becomes an important part of what we are doing. The other important part is, for example, the entire city is already Wi-Fi'd. Everything is fibered. This happened from day one. And this has actually become the backbone of why we can do so many more other ICT things because of this network today. So someone in the, we had a lot of people who had come to us to say that, now that the government has started 100 smart cities, you guys have had some experience, what does that mean? So if you're going to create a mid-sized greenfield city, it's going to cost you about 30,000 crores over the 15 years that it'll take to get there, right? The ICT part or the elements, the sensors, etc., will only be about 1,000 crores. But that will only work if the 24,000 crores is spent smartly in terms of how you've planned it, etc. Otherwise, it's not even going to work. But what's more interesting is that at 30,000 crores, if you think in terms of what it spends every year, financial systems will have to provide 3,000 to 5,000 crores funding per city every year. Now that's a problem, but you can also look at it as a tremendous opportunity of what that does. If you go back to the last century, there has never been an economic boom in any part of the world without a real estate boom, right? So if we are going to embark on that part, a combination of these 100 smart cities, new, existing, private, public, all the investment that will go into it, that is going to be the key for the next 10 years to spur a massive economic development as a whole, while getting all the benefits of longer-term sustainability, right? I know I'll run out of time, but if I had to think about as a larger city or for the folks at IBM or Cisco, right, as they work with the government institutions, the two things that really stand out, funding, definitely everybody knows. Without funding, so I won't even get into that part. I think one is around the institution, setting up our equivalent of a central cell which basically standardizes data. That's been one of our biggest challenges today, is there is no commonality. We need like a CTO or a CDO in India. Second is lighthouse projects that were talked about. We have to identify 3 or 4, invest in them first, and then go elsewhere. Otherwise, it won't work. And lastly, there's another offshoot benefit we can see. If we are going to create 100 smart cities in India, just think in terms of data analytic companies, big data companies, applications that work on citizens' benefit, sustainable technologies. You can spur startup innovation centers across the country linked to these smart city initiatives. We're already seeing that in the West. And if the opportunity happens in India, that will be the next Bangalore creation in many other parts of India. Thank you.
Thanks very much. In fact, just to touch upon one point that Sanchit mentioned is this whole area of smart cards. I remember 5 years back talked to a friend of mine who was in Singapore government and said, look, what is your eventual vision for Singapore as a smart city? And he answered the same, I think he gave the same answer that we just heard, which is that, look, we'd like to eliminate money all completely from Singapore. So instead of having the Singapore dollar, I mean, the whole connected environment will know exactly what is your net worth, which is how much money you actually own. And anywhere you go in the city, it'll be retinal scanning, which means that you get into a bus, your retina will be scanned, it'll immediately kind of debit your bank account to what happens. And eventually, when you finally run out of cash, the next time you open your eyes, you will see a Singapore police cop escorting you out of the city. Simple smart city concept. Okay? So we're going to get the final word on, we have to have an analyst at the end of it from Greyhound Research.
Thank you very much. So I think the panel has done a great job at setting the tone about the fact that smart city is not about ICT and it needs a broader perspective. So I'm going to be the bearer of the bad news. Excuse me, to start with the bad news. But we just concluded a huge study on smart cities in India, and trust me, it's far from being as fancy as it seems right now. Again, apologies for my brevity, but the point here is that we spoke to a lot of developers, we spoke to a lot of technology people, and they all have very broken visions. Within the developers, if you go and talk to the managing director, he has a very different vision to what the head of IT or head of strategic initiatives would have. I was in a smart city panel a couple of weeks ago in Bombay, and there was Mr. Mantri from Mantri Developers, and I don't mean to single him out, but there were lots of other architects, and when I spoke to them about smart cities, what they could speak about barely was that it's about smarter buildings, it's about smarter way of construction. None of them actually even understood how the technology in terms of smart apps, what is exactly big data, cloud computing and all of that, how could that really touch citizens on a daily basis? So my source of worry stems from the fact that, it's great to talk about, it's great to be technologists, wear a very futuristic hat when we sit here, but on the ground, how many, organizations internally, do they even have and enjoy a common vision is a huge problem at hand, first of all. Even if you look at the big boys of the technology sector, which is Cisco's and IBM's and others of the world, they within themselves, firstly, do not have the same vision of what is smart city. Everyone is carrying their own separate agenda. So I think the fundamental problem in making smart city happen is the fact that there are broken visions, there's broken architectures. I was in a panel of standards yesterday on cloud computing, and within the vendor community as well, there are no standards. Do CIOs really care about standards in the first place? So I think it's great to know and have. It's great to understand that we are moving towards smart cities. But I also seldom don't hear is the fact that it's a journey. And you start from a smaller objective, and the smartness of the city in itself should be a progressive topic where the end goal keeps it moving. What I also don't hear, and what the study proved, was the fact that not all cities have the same problem. So the fact is that the smartness of each city, and the point where it starts, has got to be very unique to its own set of problems, which I think still is pretty much missing. What also the report came up with the fact is that most developers today are looking at greenfield as the starting point of their smart city conversation. For them, brownfield is a bit of a gray area because the potential to probably redo the architecture is pretty limited in its own way. So while it's appreciative that developers are actually going out and sort of investing and sort of combining their forces with the technology to talk smart cities in greenfield, but I think the need for smartness is actually where the current density of population is the highest. Also, we spoke about how ready we are in the cloud world to support. Can excuse my brevity, but we're not. There was a recent case I was discussing about the fact that one of my friends went through a divorce case, and luckily or unluckily, I got a hand of his paper which had a few numbers, and I could track down his case online, and all of his case was very, very visible. Similarly is the case in Bombay. If you actually happen to sell your property, Um, and if you get to the number of that transaction, the municipal corporation allows you to access the entire files behind that corp. So I think when we think of all of these things, it's important to think of security. It's a lot of data that we're going to be accumulating in the end of the day. It's citizen data, and privacy is going to be a huge topic. Are we ready? No, we're not ready. Clearly, the barrier here is not technology. The barrier here is not intent. The barrier here is not our intent from the friends from the developer community. The barrier is that the civic bodies, the government bodies, the regulators, the industry and the technology, and the academics are not on the same page. Everybody does not have the same vision, understanding, and a framework of what a smart city is. So in my humble submission, I think I'm very pleased that when I see friends from the technology community talk very highly about smart cities and smart cities being part of the government agenda. It's great to know and learn, but when you go down to the ground zero, when you study these aspects, what you only find is broken visions, broken decision-making process. What you only find is a lack of understanding of a governing framework that what in itself, in its first, is a smart city. So I rest my case there. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sanchit. I think that's very useful because I think you're absolutely right. Because unless we can think through on a macro level, especially governance issues, I think smart cities will be in bits and pieces rather than as a holistic idea that we have to look at. In homage to the fact that I was chairing a smart cities panel, I bought a smartwatch, which not only cooks my breakfast and checks my heart rate, it also tells me that we have 5 minutes to go. And of course, we'll borrow the fact that Brian started late. So we have about 8-9 minutes for you to ask questions. So just feel free. Any thoughts that come to your mind, do not make speeches, please. Please ask questions to the panel, and I'm sure they'll be happy to. Anybody? It's a quiet audience. Bangalore, never a quiet audience.
The internet started, we had no clues of interoperable protocols. When healthcare started, we did not know how to manage healthcare, education or whatever. This whole narrative that everybody has to be in sync on the same page, that's communism. It's too perfect a concept to work. So I'm asserting in my humble assertions that we will all have different points of view, and that's the diabolic, chaotic democracy that we'll have to live in. And that's the narrative. So the whole premise of everything has to work together, every component will work, we've figured this out, we have a policy. That's utopia. Sorry.
I know, but can I counter you on that, please? It's interesting and funny when a government body that is the only body that transacts ATM data ends up buying a cloud-based email system, little realizing that that cloud is sitting in Singapore and that data in the first step shouldn't be stepping out. So my point is, it's great to have a technology, but classic 3D printing, did we realize it could actually print a gun and you could actually shoot a person with that single gun? So I think it's important to have a technology perspective to life, but it's also first important that before the technology is really operationalized, there are governing mechanisms.
No, I think this is an endless debate because as many of you technology people in the room will realize, sometimes the advancements in technology push applications. So I think it's kind of almost futile to think that we can have the perfect solution without looking at technology. I mean, if we didn't need technology, none of you would be using an iPhone. I mean, so that's the basic premise, that you will always have a technology push and a demand pull. So I think optimizing both will probably be. We'll get the last question. Brian, you had a question or a point?
Yeah, I've got a question, but maybe Girish wants to say something before that. Girish, Krishna wants to say something.
Right. Okay. So, see, one of the things that we need to do here is that this cannot be done at a city scale one shot, right? It has to be done through an activation center. So you get it done in a particular ward or a council or whatever it is called, and then you can actually implement it in other places. I think it should be a step-by-step thing according to me. Sure.
Brian?
Okay, so I've been outside the room for most of the session, being the organizer, and you may have already answered my question, but I'll ask it again anyway. The Narendra Modi government has announced 100 smart cities, and part of that plan includes upgrading existing cities. The question is, we already have infrastructure in place which is hundreds of years old, like Mumbai has stormwater drains built by the British. Would it be easier to just start afresh with smart cities and greenfield? And how difficult would it be to kind of upgrade legacy and struggle with all the bureaucratic and infrastructure. So how do you tackle greenfield? Would be easier like Lavasha or something new.
Prashant, any point?
Yeah, so we did sort of discuss this a little bit earlier, but look, I think it's a constraint that we have to live with, that an entire, starting from scratch is not going to be possible. I gave Varanasi as an example, where solid waste management is a huge issue, and it leads to a whole bunch of downstream issues such as the pollution in the river Ganga and so on. These are hard problems, right? And we're not gonna get around them that easily, necessarily moving people out to satellite towns and so on. However, that said, that's the way of the future. If we can create more urban settlements which are designed well to begin with, Shaishav alluded to a lot of that in terms of both design thinking on the urban planning as well as the technology interventions. So that will continue to have its value. The Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor cities, same theme, right? What can we do is we had the luxury of starting from scratch. So I think you will see both of these streams play out. And perhaps the focus or the effort will be slightly different. In cases like Bombay, Varanasi, traffic in Bangalore, it'll really need to be truly smart ways of using existing data, the constraints of existing infrastructure to come up with smart solutions. And the priority is slightly different when you're doing this for greenfield, but that has its own place, and there is a set of expertise that the ecosystem brings together to do that as well. So I think we have to consider both paths, and that's the only realistic way forward.
Yeah, the reality I think is that obviously all of us are living in existing cities. We're not going to suddenly uproot our children and grandchildren and go live in a greenfield city because Lodha is there. So I think it has to compensate both. I'm going to close this session by saying that yes, there are opportunities. I mean, you've all heard the potential. You've also heard of exemplary examples, whether it is Sao Paulo or Barcelona or so many others we alluded to. What's important is that everybody has to sit up and take notice. Okay, and I mentioned at the beginning, there is, I think, a consensus. In fact, I was sitting with the ministry, the Panchayat secretary in the Ministry of Rural Development. Believe me, they have a plan which is mind-boggling. So if you're not careful, my belief is that the 600,000 villages in this country, the 250,000 panchayats, will probably embrace technology and become smart much faster than some of the cities. So it is important to keep that in mind. I remember 2 years back sitting with the Pune Municipal Corporation head and telling him, sir, we have to do something about our city. I live in the city of Pune. He said, why do we need to do that? Because two of the largest Bangalore companies will soon have more employees in Pune than Bangalore. So I said, sir, that's not the answer to my question. Because everybody finds a data point and uses it to their benefit. Now I'll go back, and I was just telling Anshik that I'll tell him that, look, your neighboring Pimpri Chinchwad Municipal Corporation apparently is better using Cisco than you will. So I think that's my next dart to him. Somewhere we'll get it done. Because somewhere, whether it's central government, municipal government, locally, state governments who are more progressive, as in some cases, will make it happen. So I'm a great optimist and a great believer in India. So I believe whether it's greenfield or brownfield, we will see things changing. Things are changing in our country. So let's keep the optimism up and make things happen. And with that, time for lunch. Thank you very much.